So there's a handout, the old-fashioned way going around. I'm afraid that's as far as I've gotten, but having come all the way from Africa, it's some distance I've traveled. So this paper provides an informal description of shape, meter, and grouping in 12 West and Central African timeline patterns using recorded samples from Ghana, Togo, Liberia, Benin, the Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Tanzania. Because timelines are normally embodied, patterns of bodily movement, especially the dance feet, provide important clues to metrical orientation. The mediation of performance, in turn, undermines claims for the multi-stability or metrical undecidability of timelines. And I don't actually have time to talk about previous studies of timelines, but you probably know most of them: Princeton, Kubik, Toussaint, and others. I should also say that timelines are found in all sorts of music: traditional music, art music, popular music, so the whole gamut. So let's begin with a definition of timeline. A timeline, which is also known as a bell pattern or a guide or a phrasing referent or a topos, is a rhythmic pattern of modest length, yes, I know that's a little subjective, modest length, that is played as an unvarying ostinato, yes, I know that's redundant, but I just wanted to stress that, throughout a particular dance drumming. Okay, so a rhythmic pattern of modest length that is played as an unvarying ostinato throughout a particular dance drumming. Normally entrusted to the bell or a castanet or sticks or stone, it often carries a distinct, perhaps even memorable shape. Now, although a few timelines consist of a succession of unchanging durations, the majority of timelines normally display at least two contrasting note values. So there'll be a long and there'll be a short. And this is another sign of the minimality that's prevalent in African modes of expression. Now, timelines typically function within a polyrhythmic ensemble, but they may also accompany singing. Although the function of a timeline pattern is sometimes likened to that of a metronome, there's a fundamental difference between the two. Metronomes mark time and thus help us to locate specific rhythmic patterns against a wall of accentless articulations. Timelines, by contrast, carve time. They are the patterns, the music itself. A timeline is therefore, in principle, available for metronomic treatment, if you like. The existence of a pulse is not in question. The beat, although known and felt by ensemble members, is not necessarily reinforced at the surface of the music. Timelines are not beats. Rather, they rely on beats. Okay. So let me turn to these 12 timeline patterns. What I thought I would do, and I've given you my handout early, but I was going to give you a little dictation exercise first, and then I would show you at least one set of representations, but that would take too much time. So what I'm going to do is pass through the timelines twice, okay? This is the first time, and you can put my handout aside, and I'm just going to do this with all the human foibles of, playing the timeline. I'll just use a pen on top of a podium here, just to give you a sense of what's going on. So you might think of this as the uninterpreted or the minimally interpreted form of the timeline. So 12 of them. Timeline 1 is okay, timeline 2. Timeline 3. It's better not to look at what I've written, actually, because you're going to hear some good recordings of these things, and I may be wrong. Timeline 4. Timeline 5, this was a very well-known one. Timeline 6. Timeline 7, this is a children's one, so if you can't do this one, you're in serious trouble. Okay? Timeline 8. That's all you get. Timeline 9. Timeline 10. Now this one is a combination of 3 patterns. So the first one is, the second one is, the third one is that. Unfortunately, I cannot do all 3 at the same time. Timeline 11. I'm sorry. Down, 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 dee, 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 down, dee, down, 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 dee, 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 down, dee. Okay, a little longer. And the last one, timeline 12. Dee, 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 dee. This is actually much slower than the others. Okay, those are the 12 timelines. This is the first pass. I'm going to pass through the list again a second time, say a few things about each one of the timelines. So timeline number 1, this is the archetypal timeline. You might think of it actually as the mother of all timelines. By combining the essential values of 2 and 3, this timeline serves as a structural origin for other 12-8 timelines. In terms of shape, you can tell that it proceeds from mobility to rest. So tam 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 ta ta tam 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 ta ta. It uses 5 attack points or onsets. The underlying beat structure is 4, and this is readily seen in the dancer's movement. Now, please note that the number of onsets does not represent or does not express the beat structure. Just play you a couple of examples of this timeline. Here's one. You'll hear it in the clap pattern. That's where it is, okay? Here's another one. Sorry, we're going to rush through this very quickly. This one is from Liberia. Here's another one. This one uses that timeline almost in a motivic way. Ta ta ti ta ta. Ta ta ti ta ta. Ta ta ti ta ta. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about that one. That's the first timeline. Second timeline. Now, by a simple process of element fission, this second timeline it is actually derived from the first timeline. And again, sorry, hold on, I've just lost my place here. Okay, so by simple process of element fission, we obtain timeline pattern 2, timeline associated with elephant horn ensemble. So I think I played you a little bit of this the other night, and I'll just show you this one. Timeline 2, right? Da, 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 da. So you can tell the connection with the timeline 1. Now, the fact that we now have more onsets here. Please note that the increase in the number of onsets from 5 in timeline 1 to 6 has absolutely no structural significance. Okay, it may do for your computing systems, but it doesn't for the musical thinker here. I think sorry, I didn't put it as carefully as I might have put it, but that's because I was trying to emphasize the point. Because 5 and 6 really do belong to different order numbers. Okay, the next timeline, that's the standard pattern. This is one of the best known of all timelines. I sometimes refer to as the standard pattern, of course. In Western Central Africa, it's also found in the Caribbean. It has a durational pattern, 221, 2221, that has a number of properties that have interested, I'm bound to say, a number of Western scholars. Things like it retains a high degree of invariance under rotation, maximally even distribution of those 7 onsets within a a 12 span. It's isomorphic with respect to the interval structure of the diatonic scale, and so on. For us mortals, it will be enough to observe the pattern's never-ending quality. It's perpetually forward-looking, as if endowed with a permanent anacrusic feeling. It's different in that sense from timelines 1 and 2, right? So this timeline that we're looking at, the standard pattern, which has a kind of ongoing quality. I'll play you just a couple of examples. Here it is by itself. Here it is within an ensemble. Dum, 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 like that. One. Okay. Here is another example. On a bottle. Okay, here's another example on a piano. Da, 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 da. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1. Yeah? 1, 2. Okay. That's where the beauty is. Sorry, we're not going to argue about that. Going on. The next timeline. This one is a timeline for Adwa and a Khan dance. And I just have to say that if you cannot get used to the idea that the first onset of the bell is not the beginning of the metrical cycle, even though it's relatively long, then this timeline will be incomprehensible to you, I'm afraid. Because the timeline is tam 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 tam. And if you think the first guy you're hearing is a friend, that guy is not a friend. Here it is in the Willie Uncle's digitalized recording first. That's where the beat is. Yeah? And here it is in a field recording. I wasn't marking that because I wanted to see if you were actually indicating the beats there. Okay, so that was Adwa. Let me just go on very quickly through maybe not all of the others, but just a couple more of the others. The clave, I think this one is very well known, so maybe I'll skip that one. That's the first of the 4/4, timeline 5. And timeline 6, that's the Gahu timeline. That's the one that you all did the other night. So maybe I can skip that one too. Let me go on to timeline 7. This is a little children's play timeline. Here's an example of that from the DRC. I'm sorry, that's the clave. Sorry, that was the clave. Here's timeline 7. I think everyone is happy with that. Timeline 8 I should dwell on. This has to do with the dance. It's a modern dance called High Life, and it just has those 3 onsets. And this, what I've done in sometimes explaining this timeline to students is just to use a simple generative. You're kidding. Okay. No, the moral is don't play too much music when you do this. So what I've done with this timeline is often to suggest a simple generative process. So if you start with a dance feet like that, just 4, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4. And then you subdivide 2, 3, and 4. So you have 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, and 4. Then the next two stages, we're just going to suppress a couple of beats to play with them. So in the next stage, we'll just leave out 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 2, and 3, and 4, and then at the next stage, we'll leave out the onsets and just leave you with the end. So, and. I changed the tempo there. And that's the timeline you're getting. If you don't believe it, we'll hear it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's another example. There's an older high life. And I think they were doing and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here's a more modern recording. Okay, I'll just play you timeline 11 just because it's a really cool timeline. It's a water drum from the Mangbetu people. They're in the water. And so on. Actually, I should do you timeline 9. This Kinka timeline 9. I'll do you just that one briefly. Okay, and you'll be really grateful for this. Because the harmony helps you there. Okay, but I think you get the idea. So just a couple of words in conclusion. First, I just want to say something about the generative process that I was suggesting. So I've used this so-called generative process more than once. And this idea of starting with the dance feet and then complexifying them, if you like. It's obviously not an account of compositional genesis. It's something like a rational reconstruction, a speculative derivation of the pattern, in that case, the high life pattern. This kind of reconstruction responds to two imperatives. One is logic, and the other is cultural relevance. The logical imperative is necessary to ensure the pattern's structural integrity at each stage. The cultural imperative acknowledges its origins in habits of thought and action, and especially play, that are particular to those cultures that cultivate it. In other words, it seems to me that the generative processes should in some way reflect known attitudes within the community, not just the logic of it. Yeah? That if people have ways of suppressing beats or elongating beats and so on, building that into the generative process is, I think, a useful way of going about it, so that you're not simply using a mechanical process of doing it that has nothing to do with cultural practices within that. So that's the first point that I want to make. And then something about meter and grouping. I've used 12/8 and 4/4 and so on, and I know we could be here all day arguing about what kind of 12/8 is this African 12/8, is it African 4/4, and so on. I myself don't actually find that there's too much room for disputing these metrical attributions if one is also thinking about the range of usage in Western music. So I can always tell you, go and look at Stravinsky's scores, for example, and tell me what a 7/8 there means. And then I think the thing gets a little more complicated. But These meters represent primarily, of course, a certain cycle, a certain consistent cycle, and playing against the meters is something that we see again and again. So that's where I would just leave that if people want to talk. So this is my last paragraph here. I'd like to think of timelines as pearls of African musical wisdom, part of the ordinary, unmarked musical language of many communities, experienced in everyday genres of song and dance. These are really very ordinary things that are found all over the place. What is extraordinary about them may well stem from the very ordinariness signaled by their ubiquity and usage. Ultimately, timelines will have to be returned to the polyrhythmic textures to which they belong in order for their full significance to be grasped. But I hope that this necessarily incomplete presentation of some of their salient features has pointed the ways to ways of being in the African rhythmic world. Thank you.